Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic. It's Friday here at MTG Burgeoning, and that can only mean one thing: the Kitchen Table series, MTG Burgeoning's longest running content series, returns with deck tech number 47. And in today's video, we're going to take a very entertaining look at a mono blue Empires deck. What's up, MTG BC, baby? Oh, Kitchen Table Series number 47. This is the 47th deck tech of the Kitchen Table Series. Who would have thunk it? 47 deck techs. Oh, baby. All right, today, Mono Blue Empires. This deck is built around a cycle of Empire artifacts, and we're going to try to take advantage of those artifacts, make copies of those artifacts, and that's our win condition. That is the entire deck. As generally is customary here during the Kitchen Table series, we begin with the land base. Now, I said mono blue, so we're going to begin with 5 basic islands. So the mono blue in this deck, seemingly at this point in time, doesn't seem to be too heavy. However, we've got a couple of other ways to make blue in this quote-unquote mono blue build to go with our 5 copies of our basic islands. We're going to include a play set of an artifact land that gives us a blue mana, and that is Seat of the Synod. It is an artifact land, and we can tap it for a blue mana. 4 copies of Seat of the Synod. Because we're dealing with artifacts and we're going to need to have a lot of mana in order to activate these artifacts for our win conditions, we're going to go full on with full play sets of all of the Urza lands. So we've got 4 copies of Urza's Power Plants, and of course with Urza's Tower and Urza's Mine, this will tap to give us 2 colorless mana instead of 1. 4 copies of Urza's Power Plant. 4 copies of Urza's Mine. And of course, if we have the Power Plant and Tower in play, this will tap to give us 2 colorless mana. 4 copies of Urza's Mine. And if foreshadowing has led you anywhere else, 4 copies of Urza's Tower. And if we have the Power Plant and the Mine, this will tap for 3 colorless mana. 4 copies. So we have 5 basic islands, 4 artifact lands, and 12 Urza lands for a total of 21 lands. We are going to include 1 more land to bring our land count up to 22, and that's going to be 1 copy of Academy Ruins. It taps for a colorless, but we can tap 1 in a blue and put target artifact card in our graveyard on top of our library. And that's to help prevent our opponents from foiling our win condition by needlessly and selfishly sending our artifacts to our graveyard. All right, so the land base is installed, but we're not done with our mana yet. Since we are playing with many artifacts in this deck, it seems appropriate to include a copy of Mox Opal. Comes into play at a mana value of 0, and it has the Metalcraft mechanic, which means if we have at least 3 or more artifacts, we can tap Mox Opal for 1 mana of any color. And of course, for the purposes of this deck, that 1 mana will be blue. And of course, we're at the kitchen table, so we are also going to include our customary Soul Ring. Rounding out our mana base is going to be a copy of Mana Vault. It's a mana value of 1, and we can tap to add 3 colorless mana to our mana pool, but we cannot untap this during our untap step. We have to pay 4 during our upkeep. However, I do believe we may include some other spells in this deck that will allow us to untap Mana Vault without having to invest 4 mana. 1 Mana Vault, 1 Soul Ring, and 1 Mox Opal. All right, so should we now segue into our Empire artifacts? I think it's time. So here we go. We're going all the way back to core set 2012 for this cycle of artifacts. And we're going to begin with Crown of Empires. It has a mana value of 2, and we can tap 3 and tap the crown to tap target creature. However, if we also have Scepter of Empires and Throne of Empires, we gain control of that creature instead. 4 copies of Crown of Empires. The next Empire card is, as you have already seen through the purposes of foreshadowing, Scepter of Empires, and this has a mana value of 3. We can tap the Scepter to deal 1 damage to target player. However, if we control Crown of Empires and Throne of Empires too, it deals 3 damage to that player instead. 4 copies of Scepter of Empires. And lastly, I bet if we took a multiple choice question, you guys would get this answer right. The next Empire artifact is Throne of Empires. This one has a mana value of 4, but its activation cost is only 1. We tap the Throne, and we create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. However, if we also have Crown of Empires and Scepter of Empires, instead we create 5 of those tokens. 4 copies of Throne of Empires. And that is right there the basis of the deck. Those 12 artifacts are the basis of this deck. And now we're going to start to take a look at some of the ways in which we can begin to abuse and utilize these artifacts as our win condition. And we're going to start by showing a way in which to get those artifacts from our library into our hand by including a playset of Fabricate. Sorcery speed, 2 and a blue. Come on, camera, get in there. There we go. Search our library for an artifact card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. So Fabricate's going to get the full playset so that we can get our Empire online and start activating it right away. Next up, we want to try to have as many copies of these Empire artifacts as possible. So we're going to include a playset of Phyrexian Metamorph. It has the Phyrexian mana symbol, so it's 3 and a blue or 3 and 2 life. It is an artifact creature shapeshifter, and we may have Phyrexian Metamorph enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So, of course, our game plan is to use the Phyrexian Metamorph to come into play as a copy of the Throne of Empires, the Scepter of Empires, or the Crown of Empires. Of course, if for the purposes of our opponent's desires, if our game plan starts to go sideways, we can always have this come into play as the best creature on the battlefield. 4 copies of Phyrexian Metamorph. All right, next up we have a full playset of Clock of Omens. It's an artifact with a mana value of 4. It's from 5th Dawn, and we can tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to untap target artifact. So let's say for the purposes of, just messing around, we have 2 copies of Clock of Omens in play and our Mana Vault. We can tap both of those clocks to untap our Mana Vault and not have to invest 4 colorless mana during our upkeep to untap it. Additionally, we can untap any number of our Empire's artifacts as long as we have artifacts to tap. 4 copies of Clock of Omens. To stay on theme with keeping our artifacts untapped and gaining as much use as possible from those Empire's artifacts, 1 copy of Unwinding Clock. It's a mana value of 4, and it untaps all artifacts we control during each other player's untap step. We can consider this to be a win condition in our deck, particularly if we have our Empires online, and we can tap the Crown, the Scepter, and the Throne and get every maximum benefit of having those into play during every single turn of the game. It's only a matter of time until we win that game, folks. 1 copy of Unwinding Clock. And just for the purposes of having an additional, not so much win condition, but maybe a way in which to slow down the game to allow us better chances to get all of our Empire artifacts in play and online, we're going to include 1 copy of Platinum Angel. Mana value of 7, it's a 4/4 flyer. We can't lose the game, and our opponents can't win it. This is enough of a presence to stall out a game, particularly if our opponents are a little light on the removal. So we're going to include 1 copy of Platinum Angel as a just in case. All right, we are almost done here. We are going to go back to the purposes of making sure that we have as much mana as possible to activate our crown, to activate our scepter, to activate our throne, to do the untapping. And we're going to include a playset of Renowned Weaponsmith. Now, for the purposes of this deck, the second ability is not going to help us in any way because we are not playing with Heartpiercer Bow or Vial of Dragonfire. So for the purposes of this mono blue build, it's a 1 and a blue human artificer that's 1/3, and we can tap to add 2 colorless to our mana pool, and we can only spend that to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. That's just fine with us because that's all we want to do with the Renowned Weaponsmith. We just want to cast our artifacts, we want to activate our empires, and we want to win the game. 4 copies of Renowned Weaponsmith. And that brings us to the last play set of cards that we are including in this deck. And it is going to help us with the mana again, which honestly probably should have went with the Mox Opal Soul Ring and Mana Vault. I'm not sure why it didn't make it, but, well, here it is now to close out the deck tech. And that's going to be 1 full playset of Thran Dynamo, an artifact with a CMC of 4 that taps for 3, no drawbacks, no limitations, no punishment. This is one of the best this is one of the best mana returns on mana investment in Magic. So we're going to include 4 copies of Thran Dynamo. And that concludes this mono blue Empires build. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below if you've ever attempted to put together a deck like this. The crown, the scepter, and the throne, all together, they really power up what each of those artifacts are capable of doing. And if you're sitting down at a kitchen table, as my play group seems to be, not always, but historically they are prone to underslotting removal, particularly for artifacts and enchantments, having a full complement of the Empire's artifacts, stealing creatures, creating tokens, doing 3 points of damage to a player just by tapping one of our Empires. It really helps to close out the game very quickly. So I'd like to hear from you in the comment section below as Deck Tech number 47 concludes here at the Kitchen Table series. What do you think? You want to give a run at the mono blue Empires deck? I can tell you from experiences, and this is one of my oldest decks. Over time, it has seen refinement, it has been revised, but those Empire artifacts have been there for a while, and I'll tell you, they're very fun to play. Maybe not so much for your opponents, but if they're not going to pack any artifact removal, is that really our fault? This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.